Today we'll do a demonstration in regards to the 14th and 15th Amendment, civil rights, and U.S. citizenship. The civil or legal rights that have caused so much alarm by the Asiatic people from the rendering of the opinion of the Supreme Court by Justice Bradley on the 15th day of October, and that's a very special day, October 15th, proved to be more of misapprehension than facts. The cause as viewed by us is of little significance. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments have been held inviolate by the Supreme Court, which contain all the provisions named in the Civil Rights Bill, and the court has only nullified the manner of redress of commencing in the United States courts. It provides that the case must be commenced in the state courts wherein the offense is committed, and if the persons aggrieved think justice was not given, a repeal to the Supreme Court of the state or win to the United States District Court. And if they think that the court didn't give justice, the final appeal will be to the Supreme Court of the United States for a decision, and in this way it will be constitutional. And then once it's going to the Supreme Court, and then if you still don't receive your justice, then you go to international courts. You have to show that you exhausted all remedies, brothers and sisters. But if you go into a U.S. court, from what I was studying from the 1800s, it was showing you as a U.S. citizen. It said only a U.S. citizen can come into the U.S. courts. Justice was hung on the cross, so it's all just a chase your tail game now, brothers and sisters. We all must walk alone, but it is necessary for each state to pass civil rights bills similar to the one made void by the Supreme Court, fixing the penalty for violation and modus operandi for the prosecution under the amendment. The Civil Rights Act declared unconstitutional and void. Washington, October 15, 1883. A decision was rendered by the Supreme Court of the United States today in 5 civil rights cases, based on the first and second sections of the Civil Rights Act of March 1st, 1875. They are respectfully prosecutions under the Act for not admitting certain colored persons to equal accommodations and privileges in inns and hotels, in railroad cars, in theaters. The court holds that Congress had no constitutional authority to pass the section in question under either the 13th or 14th Amendment of the Constitution. The decision, however, is held to apply only to the validity of the law in the states and not in the territory of District of Columbia. Professor M.J. Langston, minister to Haiti, is the man who drew at the request of Chris Sumner the act of which the 2 sections were declared unconstitutional. He says, "I am surprised and deeply disappointed at the decision, but in fact, the Civil Rights Act gave us no rights which we did not already have." Isn't that what Noble Drew Ali said? Hold on, let me go get this. A divine warning by the prophet for the nations. The 14th and 15th Amendments brought the North and South in unit, placing the Southerners who were at the time without power and without nationality. I just posted that today. They were speaking about that in the chambers. I got the minutes. With the constitutional body of power. That's what this is speaking about. You'll see. And at that time, 1863, the free national constitutional law that was in force since 1774 declared all men equal and free. And if all men were declared by the free national constitution to be free and equal, since their constitution has never been changed, there is no need for the application of the 14th and 15th Amendment, right? For the salvation of our people and citizens. The 14th and 15th Amendment and the Civil Rights Bill put the Europeans up on the same footing as Asiatic, because the Asiatic was bound to the land by heritage. See, listen, this is the minutes 1866 of what they were speaking about. The principle of the sovereignty of the state was struck down, and under the 14th Amendment, the citizens of the state was declared to be a citizen of the United States. They didn't have any citizenship. The South or the Confederation, they had no nationality. I'm going to show you that clip as well, but we'll finish this. And it was the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States that gave form to and that created the being who you call a citizen of the United States. Here's the clip with the Confederation. 1786 and 1787, it was found that the Confederation was powerless. It could not borrow money. It had no status abroad. It had no nationality. and could not stamp the seal of nationality on the citizen of Pennsylvania and say, "There is the power of all the states. Go to the old world and stand in the midst of the proudest imperialist, and that signet placed on your brow show that you represent a power of 30 million people who will wipe out any insult put upon you." I want to go back to the 1866 minutes of the Civil Rights Bill number 1. Really focus on this, brothers and sisters. They was doing this to put them up on the footing because they didn't know how to harvest. They knew the Asiatic was bound to the land by heritage, and they was European foreigners, and they didn't know how to harvest. They was trying to bring themselves up on the same footing as the Asiatic, but tricking the Asiatic into celebrating, thinking it was something for them, when in fact it was for the European. They was in foreign land, they was foreigners, they didn't know how to harvest, they already been called slave traders and all this stuff. The Asiatic has been characterized as an inferior race. Yes, he is inferior in point of education, and I may say in point of numbers in this nation of ours. Inferior though he may be, he controls the destiny of the state from which I come. And why is that? Because the Asiatic is bound to the land by heritage, and he knew he was a foreigner. He said, "The Asiatic controls the destiny of the state from which I come. The power of the legislation of Mississippi, the political sovereignty of that state, is today in the hands of this race." He's talking about the Asiatic race. "The taxing power belongs to him, the power to legislate in regard to my property, and in every right that I enjoy under the guarantees of the state constitution is held at the hands of the Asiatic race, a government of the people, subject to their will in its fundamental and its statute law. What checks and balances have we save those limitations prescribed in the Constitution of the United States? The executive, the judicial, and the ministerial officers of the state are all chosen, if not directly, indirectly, by the Asiatic of that state. And why is that? They always been a so-called black belt, Asiatic belt, and he just sit there and said they don't have the numbers, but indeed they do, and that's why they have the voting power. I really like going through these minutes because these Europeans was speaking out in the open. They wasn't worried about it. Like, we're about to go deeper in the rabbit hole because while he's speaking, he's breaking down all of the BS that the states are doing now. These corporations, all these people sitting in these administrative seats, he breaks down the fraud. Like when he's speaking of the 14th Amendment making you a U.S. citizen, the Constitution already secured that, where it says the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. So that's what this European was in the minute saying. Why are y'all speaking about this 14th Amendment putting us into U.S. citizenship when we already are secured through the Constitution as American citizens? They're doing that to trick the Asiatic and bring them into the same status as a European. Right here, we're getting ready to go over where he breaks down the fraud of warrants. A person charged in any state with treason, felony, or other crime who shall flee from justice and be found in another state shall, on demand of the executive authority of the state from which he fled, be delivered up to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime. He breaks down how this is a fraud and an invasion of state rights. There is a plain provision of the Constitution. Now suppose the governor of the state of Florida, as he today does, shall refuse to give up a person who is indicted for a felony in the state of North Carolina. So in these times right here, the state of Florida would not extradite to North Carolina. The governor of the state of North Carolina has power to demand him as he does, but the felon is not delivered up. The criminal is not surrendered. If you were to undertake to give force and validity to this provision of the Constitution by an enactment of Congress, I apprehend you would be met with this floor successfully with a denial of the power to pass and enforce any such law. It would be declared to be an invasion of state rights. Whatever of state rights is left, for some still insist we have state rights, and would not senators on both sides of this chamber declare that there was no power in this government to go with the army under a law of Congress to take an escaped felon from the protection of one governor and surrender him to another? But if the provision of the Constitution was followed by a clause declaring that Congress should have power to enforce this provision by appropriate legislation, then our way would be clear and the duty would be unmistakable. When the 13th Amendment came declaring that slavery and involuntary servitude should no longer exist, it was followed by a clause declaring that Congress should have power to enforce the article by appropriate legislation, using the strongest language known to the vocabulary. It was the first time that the Constitution had declared that Congress should have power to enforce any of the provisions of the Constitution of the United States. It is true under the 8th section of the first article of the Constitution, which says that Congress is to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers of all powers vested by the Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof. Congress had the power to pass laws, but how would Congress enforce those laws? Suppose when Congress passed a law attaching the citizens of the state should throw the arm of sovereign protection around the citizen to shield him from the legislation which Congress had deemed proper to pass. Where was the power in this government before the war to enforce it? It was denied, and so it was that there was no vitality or force existing in the government before the adoption of the 13th Amendment to enforce the provisions of the Constitution itself, although it was decided by the Supreme Court that there was such a being as a citizen of the United States. That there was such a being, you know what I'm saying? When you undertook to trace the existence of the being, he was very distant. Was the citizen of the District of Columbia a citizen of the United States? He did not live in any one of the states. Whoa, that's talking about District of Columbia, brother, not being a territory. He did not live in any one of the states of the Union. A citizen of the United States was one declared to be by the courts a citizen of one of the states of the Union, but the Constitution comes after the war and it enlarges altogether the citizenship and declares that there is such a being as a United States citizen. But we need to speak of nationality, and these people knew that too. They knew this U.S. citizen was a creature with no nationality. 3/5, same as black, same as yellow, white, all that. The facts are in a nutshell that the United States Congress has no constitutional right to legislate or make laws for the government of the citizens of the several states, as each state is a sovereign of itself, but it has a right to amend its constitution so as to grant or deny the states to enact any particular law, as in the case in question under the 14th Amendment. It is prohibitory on the part of the states to enact any law abridging the equal rights of citizens on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And also you can add nationality, which stand as firm as the rocks of Gibraltar. You got that right, Islam. The constitutional laws granting equal rights, equal privileges to hotels, cars, theaters, etc. has not been disturbed by the decision of the Supreme Court. Now listen to this. But the modus operandi of instituting the suit has only been changed from the United States District Court to the courts of the respective states, except in cases of non-residents. So if you're national, you skip the state BS, the tribunals, and go straight to either national tribunal or international tribunal. But for those that want civil rights, they go to the state tribunals. That's all it's saying. Except in cases of non-residents, which are nationals, from which an appeal to the United States court can be taken by the parties aggrieved, which will in such case be transmitted in a constitutional manner and decided accordingly by the court. The court is not in error but did its duty, and that's true indeed. There are but few people who know what the truth is about man, and that few know that it is foolish to try to impart it to the ignorant. Although the ignorant has finished college, he is a fool right on, being trained to jump through a hoop. The longer he stays in the schools, the better he can jump, and the more vivid he will defend his jumping. Divine honors to Prophet Noble Drew Ali. He knocked down and swept away all the confusion. He smashed it. Everyone who's trying to tell you how to do a process for freedom or trying to do this commercial process and you got to jump through all these hoops and processes. No, Drew Ali said don't jump through the hoops. He told you right there, don't deal with anyone trying to get you to jump through all these processes. And on top of that, having to pay notes too. Don't let them get you for your mazunas. Again, Moorish American Month, August 2023. Islam, brothers and sisters, we got another one in.